As you know, Volume 2 of his report dealt with obstruction, and the special counsel considered whether certain actions of the president could amount to obstruction. He decided not to reach a conclusion. Instead, the report recounts 10 episodes and discusses potential legal theories for connecting the president's actions to elements of obstruction offenses. Now, we first heard that the special counsel's decision not to decide the obstruction issue at the March 5th meeting when he came over to the department, and we were frankly surprised that they were not going to reach a decision on obstruction. We asked them a lot about the reasoning behind this and the basis for this. Special Counsel Mueller stated 3 times to us in that meeting in response to our questioning that he emphatically was not saying that but for the OLC opinion, he would have found obstruction. He said that in the future, the facts of a case against the president might be such that a special counsel would recommend abandoning the OLC opinion, but this is not such a case. We did not understand exactly why the special counsel was not reaching a decision. And when we pressed him on it, he said that his team was still formulating the explanation. When the report came in on the 22nd and we saw it was going to take a great deal of time to get it out to the public, I made the determination that we had to put out some information about the bottom line. The body politic was in a high state of agitation. There was massive interest in learning what the bottom line results of Bob Mueller's investigation was, particularly as to collusion. Former government officials were confidently predicting that the president and members of his family were going to be indicted. There were people suggesting that if it took any time to turn around the report and get it out, it would mean that the president was in legal jeopardy. So I didn't feel that it was in the public interest to allow this to go on for several weeks without saying anything. And so I decided to simply state what the bottom line conclusions were, which is what the department normally does, make a binary determination. Is there a crime or isn't there a crime? So we released that. I offered Bob Mueller the opportunity to review that letter before it went out, and he declined. On Thursday morning, I received, it probably was received at the department Wednesday night or evening, but on Thursday morning I received a letter from Bob, the letter that's just been put into the record. And I called Bob and said, you know, what's the issue here? And I asked him if he was suggesting that the March 24th letter was inaccurate, and he said no, but that the press reporting had been inaccurate, and that the press was reading too much into it. And I asked him, you know, specifically what his concern was, and he said that his concern focused on his explanation of why he did not reach a conclusion on obstruction, and he wanted more put out on that issue. He argued for putting out summaries of each volume, the executive summaries that had been written by his office. And if not that, then other material that focused on the issue of why he didn't reach the obstruction question. But he was very clear with me that he was not suggesting that we had misrepresented his report. I told Bob that I was not interested in putting out summaries, and I wasn't going to put out the report piecemeal. I wanted to get the whole report out, and I thought summaries by very definition, regardless of who prepared them, would be under-inclusive, and we'd have sort of a series of different debates and public discord over each tranche of information that went out, and I wanted to get everything out at once, and we should start working on that. And so the following day, I put out a letter explaining the process we were following and stressing that the March 24th letter was not a summary of the report, but a statement of the principal conclusions, and that people would be able to see Bob Mueller's entire thinking when the report was made public. So I'll end my statement there, Mr. Chairman, and glad to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Given the fact that a lot of people, Comey, should be fired, did you find that to be a persuasive act of obstructing justice?
No. I think even the report, at the end of the day, came to the conclusion, if you read the analysis, that a reason that loomed large there for his termination was his refusal to tell the public what he was privately telling the president, which was that the president was not under investigation.
As to where we go forward, as to how we go forward, would you recommend that this committee and every other committee of Congress do our best to harden our infrastructure against future attacks?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you think Russia is still up to it?
Yes.
You think other countries may get involved in our elections in 2020?
Yes.
So you would support an effort by Congress working with the administration to harden our electoral structure?
Yes.
Is that one of the takeaways of the Mueller report?
Yes.
Just to finish this, but you still have a situation where a president essentially tries to change the lawyer's account in order to prevent further criticism of himself.
Well, that's not a crime.
So you can, in this situation, instruct someone to lie?
No, it has to be, well, to be obstruction of justice, the lie has to be tied to impairing the evidence in a particular proceeding. McGahn had already given his evidence, and I think it would be plausible that the purpose of McGahn memorializing what the president was asking was to make the record that the president never directed him to fire. And there is a distinction between saying to someone, go fire him, go fire Mueller, and saying, have him removed based on conflict.
And what would
They have different results.
what would that conflict be?
Well, the difference between them is if you remove someone for a conflict of interest, then there would be presumably another person appointed.
Yeah, but wouldn't you have to have it in this kind of situation, an identifiable conflict that made sense, or else doesn't it just become a fabrication?
Well, now we're going to shift from the issue of writing the memo or somehow putting out a release later on, and the issue of the actual direction to McGahn. So the question on the direction to McGahn has a number of different levels to it. And first, as a matter of law, I think the department's position would be that the president can direct the termination or the replacement of a special counsel.
If you read the section here, pages 113 to 120, on Don McGahn's experience, the president wanted him to state publicly that the New York Times article was untrue, that he had not asked McGahn to fire the special counsel. McGahn refused, and there's some speculation as to whether he risked being dismissed or even resigning over this issue. And for you to suggest that this was some sort of a kabuki dance with Rob Rosenstein, I think the president's intent here was very clear. He wanted this to end. He told Lester Holt, going back to the issue that was raised by the chairman earlier here, the reason to get rid of Comey is because of the Russian investigation. I mean, over and over again, this president was very explicit, and it certainly is very expository in his style. So I don't understand. Let me ask you this in conclusion, my time is up. Do you have any objections? Can you think of an objection of why Don McGahn shouldn't come and testify before this committee about his experience?
Yes, I mean, I think that he's a close advisor to the president.
Never,
and the president
never exerted executive privilege.
Excuse me?
He may have already waived his.
No, we haven't waived executive privilege.
Well, at this point, do you believe, you're saying Don, what about Bob Mueller? Should he be allowed to testify before this?
I've already said publicly I have objection to him.
And Don McGahn, should he be allowed to testify?
Well, that's a call for the president to make.
Well, he's a private citizen at this point, as I understand.
Well, I assume he'd be testifying about privileged matters.
Well, I would hope that we could get to the bottom of this with actual testimony of witnesses after we've taken another close look to Hillary Clinton's emails. Thank you.
On those remaining investigations, the 12 to 14 investigations, whether you have had any communication with anyone in the White House?
No.
And will you give us an ironclad commitment that you will in no way
By the way,
interfere?
I'm not sure, the laundry list of investigations, but I certainly haven't talked the substance or been directed to do anything on any of the cases.
Well, let me give you an opportunity to clarify.
Yeah.
Have you had any conversations with anyone in the White House about those ongoing investigations that were spawned or spun off by?
I don't recall having any substantive discussion on the investigation.
Have you had any non-substantive discussion?
I mean, it's possible that a name of a case was mentioned.
And have you provided information about any of those ongoing investigations? Any information whatsoever?
I don't recall, no.
You don't recall?
I don't recall providing any.
Wouldn't you recall about whether you gave information to somebody in the White House about an ongoing criminal investigation in the Southern District of New York, or the Eastern District of New York, or the Eastern District of Virginia, or the Department of Justice?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't recall providing any substantive information about a case.
Is there anything that would refresh your recollection?
If I probably looked over a list of cases and thought about it. But I don't recall discussing.
You know what those investigations are. We've discussed them at your confirmation hearing, correct?
Whether, I think there's 12 or 18 cases, right?
You don't know what those investigations are, Mr. Trent?
I do generally, but I can't remember each of the.
And let me ask you one last time. You can't recall whether you have discussed those cases with anyone in the White House, including the President of the United States?
My recollection is I have not discussed those.
But you don't recall for sure. Let me move on.
I can say very surely I did not discuss the substance of any.
Will you recuse yourself from those investigations?
No.
So if we can talk about that 2016 presidential election, do you see vulnerabilities or weaknesses that existed at that time that left us open to foreign aggression, foreign influence in the election system? And then how do we move forward through the Department of Justice and making sure we're shoring up some of those avenues of approach of our foreign adversaries?
Yes. The FBI, has a very robust program, the Foreign Influence Task Force, which is focused on this problem and is working to counteract and prepare for the kinds of interference that we have seen. And it's a very dynamic program. I've been briefed on it by Chris Wray, and I'm very impressed with what they're up to. I think that the way I view this general problem is there has always been efforts by Russia and other hostile countries to influence American elections and public opinion, but it was more easily detectable, and it was sort of a cruder operation in the past. And what we have now is, with technology and the democratization of information, the danger is far more insidious. And it enables not only them getting into effectively our whole communication system here in the United States, and I mean just the way we communicate with each other and into our business systems, our infrastructure, but it also allows them to do exactly what we've seen, which is, because of our robust First Amendment freedoms, they're able to come in and pretend they're Americans and affect the dialogue and the social dynamics in the United States in a way that they've never been able to do before. And it's a huge challenge to deal with it, but I think the intelligence community is responding to the challenge and the threat. I think I had this discussion with Bob Mueller on March 5th when he was briefing me on his work and discussing lessons learned, what he has seen in dismantling the threats that he was able to detect, and how we can start using that approach across the board.
So I see we've accomplished a lot through our federal agencies and through the Department of Justice then. Are we able to work with different social media giants, other private organizations to help counter some of this? Do you see that they are actually stepping up to this challenge, taking this on and making sure that they are pushing back as well against what they might determine as a foreign adversary?
Yes, I think the private companies are, stepping up their game and being more responsible in addressing it.
I think
And-
it's,
and- yeah.
I think that's important. I'm sorry, go ahead,
No,
please,
that's-
General.
that's-